In 167 BC, a tyrant issued a decree: forbid circumcision, forbid keeping the Sabbath, forbid even eating a kosher meal. Violators would be executed. But what he didn't expect was that his cruelty would awaken something far more dangerous than any armors, the unyielding faith of madmen. This isn't a video game. This is the true story of the Maccabees, the crazy ones who dared to defy the mightiest empire of their time. They had no advanced weapons, no superior numbers, just one thing that terrified their enemies, a loyalty that would not break, even in death. Have you ever wondered, what drives the weak to rise against an empire? Why was this story erased from the Western Bible? And most importantly, what brutal lesson does it hold for our world today? Let's uncover the 2,200-year-old secret that every oppressor wants you to forget. The Judean hills, ancient witnesses to the ebb and flow of empires, had grown accustomed to the tramp of foreign legions. Yet, the shadow that now fell upon the land was different, more insidious than the straightforward demands of tribute or the occasional heavy-handed suppression of dissent. This was a darkness that sought to extinguish the very soul of the people, to sever the ancient cords that bound them to their God and their traditions. Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, the self-proclaimed manifest God, had arrived not merely to rule, but to remake them in his Hellenistic image, and his decrees were like a chilling wind that threatened to snuff out the flickering flame of their faith. For generations, the covenant with Abraham, etched in the very flesh of their sons through the sacred rite of circumcision, had been a tangible link to their heritage, a physical manifestation of their unique identity. Now this cornerstone of their spiritual life was outlawed, punishable by death. To the devout, this was not just a political decree, it was a sacrilege, an assault on the very essence of their being. The whispers of fear mingled with the simmering embers of defiance in the marketplaces and the hushed tones of clandestine gatherings in the homes of the faithful. Unlike the often passive image of faith, a gentle acceptance of divine will, the faith of the Maccabees was forged in the crucible of oppression, becoming a weapon of spiritual survival. It was a visceral, embodied belief that pulsed in their veins, a conviction so profound that it transcended the fear of earthly power. They saw their traditions not as mere customs, but as the very DNA of their spiritual inheritance, passed down through generations, a sacred trust they were duty-bound to protect. When the edicts arrived, demanding the abandonment of their most sacred practices, the faithful understood that this was not just about religious observance, it was about the survival of their identity, their very existence as a distinct people. The story of the Hanukkah miracle, the single flask of oil that miraculously burned for 8 days in the rededicated temple, often resonated as a divine intervention, a testament to God's favor. But perhaps, beneath the veneer of the supernatural, lay a deeper truth, an allegory for the indomitable spirit of the Jewish people. Perhaps the oil that burned was their collective resolve, the unwavering commitment to their faith that fueled them through the darkest of times. They burned their spiritual energy, their hopes, and their determination to keep the flame of their traditions alive against all odds. As the philosopher Niels Bohr might have pondered centuries later, miracles often reside in the realms yet unexplained by the prevailing understanding of the world. In this context, the miracle of Hanukkah could be seen as the extraordinary resilience of a people refusing to let their spiritual light be extinguished. In the small village of Modian, the aging priest Mattathias, a man whose beard flowed like a silver river down his chest and whose eyes held the wisdom of generations, stood as a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. Royal officials arrived, demanding that he, a respected figure in the community, offer pagan sacrifice, a symbolic act of submission to Antiochus's decree. They sought to break the spirit of the people by forcing their leaders to betray their faith. Surrounded by his 5 sons, Johanan, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan Mattathias faced a choice that would define not only his own destiny, but the future of his people. As a trembling villager stepped forward, swayed by fear and the promise of favor, to offer the forbidden sacrifice, a fire ignited in the heart of Mattathias. It was not just righteous anger, but a profound sense of betrayal, a realization that silence was no longer an option. In a moment that would be etched into the annals of their history, Mattathias, fueled by an unyielding faith, drew his sword and struck down not only the apostate villager, but also the royal official who had compelled him. His defiant cry, echoing through the stunned village, became the spark that ignited the flame of rebellion. "Everyone who is zealous for the Torah and stands by the covenant, follow me." 1 milliampere Maccabees 2:27. This act was more than just a violent outburst. It was a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. It was a refusal to compromise on the fundamental tenets of their faith, a willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of their spiritual integrity. In an era where cancel culture was unimaginable, Mattathias's action served as a stark reminder of the need to decisively reject any force that seeks to undermine the core values of a community. It was a spiritual surgery, a painful but necessary excision of the elements that threatened to corrupt the whole. The subsequent flight of Mattathias and his sons into the rugged Judean wilderness marked the beginning of a struggle that would test the very limits of their endurance and their faith. The fire of their rebellion was not just the literal clash of swords, but the burning conviction in their hearts, a sacred flame that refused to be extinguished by the winds of oppression. Interestingly, the festival that commemorates this pivotal moment, Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, was also known by another name, according to the historian Josephus, the Festival of Fire. This alternate name speaks to the dual nature of the Maccabean revolt, a battle fought with both spiritual fervor and fierce, unyielding force. The flame that was rekindled in the temple was a symbol of their rededication to God, but it was also fueled by the fiery courage of those who dared to defy a powerful empire for the sake of their beliefs. The unyielding faith of Mattathias and his sons had lit a fire that would illuminate the darkest corners of their struggle and ultimately lead them towards a future where they could once again practice their faith freely. The rugged terrain of Judea, a tapestry of steep hills, narrow valleys, and hidden caves, became the unlikely crucible in which a new form of resistance was forged. Mattathias, though aged, possessed a fiery spirit that inspired those who flocked to his banner. However, his time as the leader of the fledgling rebellion was brief. Upon his death, the mantle of leadership fell to his son Judah, a man whose name, Judas, would forever be intertwined with the struggle for Judean independence. Judah, later to be known by the honorific Maccabees, the hammer, was a study in contrasts. He possessed a fierce courage and a seemingly inexhaustible energy in battle, a whirlwind of righteous fury against the Seleucid oppressors. Yet, beneath this outward display of martial prowess lay a sharp, calculating mind, a strategic brilliance that allowed a small, poorly equipped band of rebels to repeatedly outmaneuver and defeat the vastly superior forces of the Hellenistic Empire. The Seleucid army was a formidable war machine, boasting well-trained infantry, heavily armored cavalry that dominated open ground, and the sheer weight of numbers. Conventional wisdom dictated that any open confrontation would be suicidal for the Maccabean rebels. But Judas understood the limitations of his own forces and the vulnerabilities of his enemy. He recognized that the Judean hills, seemingly a disadvantage, could be transformed into a strategic asset. The Battle of Emmaus in 166 BCE street hands as an early and remarkable example of what would later be termed asymmetric warfare. The Seleucid general Gorgias, confident in his numerical superiority, had taken a large force to attack the rebel stronghold by night, intending to crush the uprising decisively. However, Judas, displaying a keen understanding of his enemy's movements and a boldness that bordered on audacity, had anticipated this maneuver. Instead of waiting to be attacked, he led his own forces in a swift, silent march to the Seleucid encampment at Emmaus. Descending upon the unsuspecting enemy before dawn, Judas's men unleashed a furious assault. The Seleucid soldiers, weary from their night march and caught completely off guard, were thrown into disarray. Panic spread through their ranks as the rebels, fighting with the ferocity of men defending their homes and their faith, cut through their lines. The Seleucid camp, filled with supplies and the spoils of their campaigns, became a scene of chaos and carnage. Meanwhile, Gorgias and his detachment, having found the rebel camp deserted, returned to Emmaus to find their main force routed and their supplies plundered. The psychological impact of this defeat was immense. The seemingly invincible Seleucid army had been outsmarted and outfought by a ragtag group of Jewish rebels. The victory at Emmaus not only provided the Maccabees with much-needed supplies and boosted their morale, but also demonstrated Judas's tactical genius to both his followers and his enemies. Judas's strategic brilliance extended beyond battlefield tactics. He understood the importance of striking at the enemy's morale. On several occasions, he employed daring nighttime raids on Seleucid camps, as recounted in 1 Maccabees 4-1-5. These weren't necessarily large-scale engagements, but rather swift, disruptive attacks designed to sow fear and confusion among the enemy ranks. The sudden appearance of the rebels in the darkness, the chaos of the attack, and the subsequent retreat before reinforcements could arrive, played on the Seleucid soldiers' anxieties, making them believe they were constantly under threat, surrounded by an unseen enemy. This early form of psychological warfare eroded their confidence and made them more hesitant in their movements. Judas Maccabeus was more than just a skilled military commander. He was a leader who understood the hearts and minds of his people. His success stemmed from a potent combination of factors: a profound visionary commitment to their religious ideals, a pragmatic strategic mind that could turn their weaknesses into strengths, and a deep empathy for the plight and the fears of the Jewish population under Seleucid rule. He fought not just for territory, but for the very soul of his nation, and his unwavering belief in their cause resonated deeply with those who rallied to his banner. The name Maccabeus, beyond its literal meaning of the hammer, may also carry a deeper significance. Some scholars suggest that it could be derived from the Aramaic word Maccaba, meaning to extinguish or to stamp out, implying that Judas was one who stamped out the oppression or extinguished the threat to their faith. Another interpretation links it to the Hebrew acronym for the phrase, Mi kamoka bailim Adonai, who is like you among the gods, O Lord? A battle cry that likely echoed through the Judean hills as Judas and his men charged into battle. This interpretation further underscores the deeply religious underpinning of their rebellion. Whether he was primarily a rebel or a strategic genius is perhaps a false dichotomy. Judas Maccabeus was both. His rebellious spirit, fueled by an unyielding faith, provided the impetus for the uprising. But it was his sharp tactical mind, his ability to adapt to the circumstances, and his understanding of both military strategy and psychological warfare that allowed the rebellion to not only survive, but to achieve remarkable victories against a far more powerful foe. He was the hammer that struck blows against the oppressor, but he was also the strategic mind that knew precisely where and when to strike to inflict the most damage. His legacy would endure, a testament to the power of courage, faith, and strategic thinking in the face of overwhelming odds. The heroic saga of the Maccabees, filled with tales of unwavering faith, strategic brilliance, and fierce resistance against overwhelming odds, would seemingly be a natural fit within the sacred scriptures of Judaism and, by extension, early Christianity. Yet, the books of 1 and 2 Maccabees, while historically significant and the primary sources for understanding this pivotal period, found themselves relegated to the Apocrypha, a collection of books considered canonical by some but not by others. This exclusion is a complex issue, rooted in a confluence of political, linguistic, and theological factors that shaped the evolving canons of both faiths. One of the primary reasons for the eventual exclusion of the Maccabean books from the Hebrew Bible, and consequently the Protestant Old Testament, lies in the timing of their composition and the subsequent processes of canonization. The Hebrew Bible, as it came to be recognized by Jewish authorities, was largely finalized by the Council of Jamnia around 90 CE blank. The books of 1 and 2 Maccabees were likely written in the 2nd and early 1st centuries BCE, placing them outside this time frame. The rabbinic scholars at Jamnia primarily recognized books written in Hebrew and those that held a continuous tradition of acceptance within the Jewish community from earlier periods. The Maccabean texts, while deeply relevant to Jewish history, were later additions. Furthermore, the original Hebrew version of 1 Maccabees is believed to have been lost, with the primary surviving texts being in Greek. This linguistic factor further contributed to its marginalization within Jewish tradition, which placed a high value on the Hebrew language as the language of divine revelation. While 2 Maccabees was also written in Greek, its different style and focus further distinguished it. The early Christian Church, drawing its scriptures from the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, initially held a broader view of which texts were considered sacred. The Septuagint included books that were later excluded from the Hebrew canon, including 1 and 2 Maccabees. However, as the Christian movement developed its own distinct identity and sought to define its scriptural boundaries, debates arose regarding the authority of these additional texts. By the 4th century CE, as the Church Fathers sought to solidify the Christian canon, a distinction began to emerge between books that were widely accepted and those that were viewed with some reservation. The influence of figures like Jerome, who translated the Bible into Latin, the Vulgate, and largely followed the Hebrew canon, played a significant role in this process. Jerome himself expressed doubts about the canonical status of some of the apocryphal books, including Maccabees. Political considerations also played a subtle yet significant role. By the 4th century, the Christian Church was navigating its relationship with the Roman Empire. The story of the Maccabees, a narrative of Jewish resistance against foreign rule, might have been seen as potentially problematic in the context of the Church's efforts to portray Christians as obedient subjects of the Roman authorities, aligning with passages like Romans 13:1-7, which emphasizes submission to governing powers. Highlighting a story of successful revolt against a ruling power could have been interpreted as subversive or inflammatory. Theological nuances also contributed to the differing views on the Maccabean books. For instance, 2 Maccabees 7 recounts the martyrdom of a mother and her 7 sons, who willingly endure torture and death for their faith, expressing belief in a future resurrection. While the concept of resurrection is present in Jewish thought, the explicit articulation of dying for one's faith and the detailed accounts of their suffering might have resonated differently within early Christian theological frameworks, particularly in relation to the emphasis on grace and salvation through Christ, as later developed by figures like Augustine. Augustine's theology of grace emphasized that salvation comes from God's divine favor, rather than through heroic human actions like martyrdom. The Maccabean narrative, with its focus on human courage and sacrifice in defense of faith, could be seen as potentially diverging from this central tenet. Despite their eventual exclusion from the Protestant Old Testament, the books of 1 and 2 Maccabees have continued to hold significance within the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, where they are considered part of the deuterocanonical books. Interestingly, even within the Catholic tradition, the Catechism quotes 1 and 2 Maccabees a notable 14 times, particularly in its section on conscience, paragraph 1776, highlighting the enduring moral and ethical lessons found within these texts, even if their canonical status differs. This suggests that while their place within the formal scriptural canon might be debated, their historical, ethical, and theological influence has persisted. In conclusion, the story of the Maccabees and the peculiar position of their books within the broader scriptural landscape can be seen as a fascinating time capsule containing multiple layers of meaning. On a historical level, they provide invaluable insight into the Jewish struggle for independence in the Hellenistic period. On a symbolic level, they represent the timeless battle between cultural assimilation and the preservation of unique identity in the face of external pressures. And on a metaphysical level, they grapple with the profound question of the limits of faith. When does one rely solely on prayer and divine intervention? And when is it necessary to take up the sword in defense of one's beliefs and traditions? The story of the Maccabees, whether considered canonical scripture or revered historical narrative, continues to provoke thought and inspire reflection on these enduring themes. The reign of Antiochus, II. Epiphanes cast a long and oppressive shadow over Judea, a darkness that seeped into every facet of Jewish life. His policies, driven by a fervent desire to Hellenize his vast Seleucid empire, went far beyond mere political control. Antiochus sought to eradicate the unique cultural and religious identity of the Jewish people, to mold them into compliant subjects of his Hellenistic vision. This deliberate and forceful imposition of Greek customs and beliefs laid the groundwork for the fierce and ultimately successful Maccabean revolt. Hellenization, the spread of Greek culture, language and thought, had been a gradual process in the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries following the conquests of Alexander the Great. While some Jews had willingly embraced aspects of Hellenistic culture, finding common ground in philosophy, art and commerce, the core tenets of their monotheistic faith and their deeply rooted traditions remained sacrosanct. Antiochus, however, was not content with a superficial adoption of Greek ways. He aimed for a complete cultural and religious transformation. His decrees targeted the very heart of Jewish practice. The Sabbath, the sacred day of rest and spiritual reflection, was forbidden. The observance of Jewish festivals and holy days was outlawed. The possession and reading of the Torah, the very foundation of their religious and legal system, became a capital offense. The altars in Jewish homes, used for personal prayer and observance, were desecrated. These were not merely infringements on religious freedom, they were direct assaults on the covenant that bound the Jewish people to their God. The most egregious act of sacrilege, the one that truly ignited the flames of rebellion, was the desecration of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. This magnificent edifice, the center of Jewish worship and national identity, was forcibly converted into a pagan shrine dedicated to Zeus Olympius. An altar to this Greek deity was erected within its sacred precincts, and the abomination of a pig sacrifice, an animal considered unclean in Jewish law, was offered upon it. This act, often referred to as the abomination of desolation, Daniel 11:31-12:11, was a profound insult to the Jewish faith, a deliberate attempt to obliterate their most sacred symbols and practices. Antiochus appointed Hellenizing Jews to positions of power, individuals who were willing to compromise their traditions and enforce the king's decrees. This created deep divisions within Jewish society. On one side were those who, either out of conviction or fear, embraced Hellenistic customs and abandoned their ancestral faith. They participated in pagan rituals, adopted Greek names, and frequented the gymnasia, institutions that were seen as centers of Greek culture, but were also associated with practices considered immodest and contrary to Jewish law. On the other side were the Hasidim, the pious ones, who clung fiercely to their traditions and resisted any compromise with Hellenistic practices. They viewed Antiochus's actions as an existential threat to their faith and their identity. It was from this deeply committed segment of society that the initial sparks of resistance would emerge. The story of Eleazar, an elderly and respected scribe who refused to eat pork even under threat of torture and death, 2 Maccabees 6:18-31, exemplifies the unwavering commitment of those who chose faith over worldly compromise. His courageous defiance served as an inspiration to others, demonstrating that some were willing to pay the ultimate price to uphold their religious principles. Similarly, the account of the 7 brothers and their mother, 2 Maccabees 7, who faced horrific tortures with unwavering faith and a defiant belief in the resurrection, became a powerful symbol of resistance against tyranny and a testament to the enduring power of their convictions. It was in this environment of escalating oppression and sacrilege that Mattathias and his sons made their fateful stand in Modane. Their act of defiance was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of growing resentment and a desperate refusal to allow their faith to be extinguished. Antiochus's heavy-handed policies, intended to unify his empire through forced Hellenization, ironically served to galvanize the Jewish population and ignite a rebellion that would ultimately challenge his authority and reshape the political landscape of the region. The shadow of Antiochus, meant to darken and subdue Judea, instead fostered the seeds of a resistance that would shine as a beacon of faith and courage for generations to come. With the initial flames of rebellion fanned into a steady blaze, the leadership of Judas Maccabeus became the linchpin of the Jewish resistance. The wilderness of Judea, once a place of refuge for outlaws and hermits, now echoed with the determined footsteps of his growing band of fighters. Their resolve, tempered by the harsh realities of their environment and the unwavering conviction in their cause, transformed them into a formidable, albeit unconventional, fighting force. Judas, understanding the inherent limitations of confronting the Seleucid war machine head-on, masterfully employed a strategy predicated on agility, surprise, and intimate knowledge of the land. The narrow passes, the hidden wadis, the dense thickets, these became his allies, allowing his smaller, less equipped forces to engage and disengage with a speed and fluidity that baffled their heavier, more conventional adversaries. His early campaigns were a testament to his tactical ingenuity, a series of well-planned ambushes and lightning-fast raids that chipped away at Seleucid control and instilled a growing sense of fear and unease within their ranks. The engagement at the pass of Wadi Haramia served as an early demonstration of Judas's ability to exploit the terrain. The Seleucid contingent, likely expecting an easy suppression of what they perceived as a minor uprising, marched confidently into the narrow gorge, only to find themselves trapped in a deadly crossfire. The rebels, concealed amongst the rocks and shadows, rained down a hail of stones and javelins before closing in for hand-to-hand combat. The ferocity of their attack, born of desperation and righteous anger, overwhelmed the Seleucid soldiers, leaving behind a scene of significant casualties and a much-needed bounty of weapons for the poorly armed rebels. This initial victory, though not strategically decisive, provided a crucial psychological boost, proving to both the rebels and the wider Jewish community that resistance was not futile. The confrontation with Apollonius and his forces marked a further escalation of the conflict. Apollonius, a seasoned Seleucid commander known for his ruthlessness, arrived with a larger and better-equipped army, intent on crushing the nascent rebellion swiftly and decisively. Judas, however, refused to be intimidated. He met Apollonius in battle, the exact location of which remains debated by historians, but the outcome was a resounding victory for the Maccabees. Accounts suggest that Judas may have utilized a feigned retreat, a classic tactic to draw the enemy into a less advantageous position before turning to deliver a surprise counterattack. The death of Apollonius himself on the battlefield, with Judas seizing his sword as a trophy of war, was a symbolic victory of immense importance. It not only deprived the Seleucids of a capable leader, but also provided the rebels with a tangible symbol of their triumph, the very weapon of their oppressor now wielded in their defense. These early successes were not solely attributable to Judas's military acumen. His leadership was deeply intertwined with his profound religious faith. He rallied his followers not just with promises of liberation, but with the conviction that they were fighting a holy war, a battle to defend their covenant with God against pagan desecration. His speeches often invoked the courage of their ancestors and the divine promises made to their people, instilling in his men a sense of righteous purpose that transcended mere military duty. This spiritual dimension of the rebellion was a key factor in their resilience and their willingness to face seemingly insurmountable odds. Furthermore, Judas astutely understood the power of psychological warfare. His swift, unexpected attacks kept the Seleucid forces constantly on edge, unsure of when and where the rebels would strike next. The whispers of Jewish victories spread throughout the land, undermining Seleucid authority and encouraging more and more Jews, disillusioned with the oppressive rule of Antiochus and inspired by the Maccabees' courage, to join their ranks. The trickle of initial recruits swelled into a steady stream of determined fighters, bolstering Judas's forces and expanding the reach of the rebellion. The Seleucid response to these early setbacks was to deploy larger and more formidable armies. The Battle of Emmaus, as previously detailed, was a direct consequence of their determination to crush the uprising with overwhelming force. However, Judas's audacious maneuver of attacking the Seleucid encampment while their main force was away demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that far exceeded mere guerrilla tactics. It was a bold and decisive move that resulted in a significant victory, providing the rebels with much-needed supplies, including arms and provisions, and delivering a devastating blow to Seleucid morale. The shock of such a defeat at the hands of a seemingly insignificant rebel force reverberated throughout the Seleucid administration, forcing them to reassess the seriousness of the Maccabean revolt. Following Emmaus, Judas continued to press his advantage. The encounter with Seron, another Seleucid commander, at the ascent of Beth Horon, further solidified Judas's reputation as a brilliant military leader. Again, despite likely being outnumbered, Judas employed superior tactics and the fierce determination of his men to rout the Seleucid forces. These repeated victories against different Seleucid commanders and armies underscored the effectiveness of Judas's leadership and the growing strength of the Maccabean movement. The early campaigns under Judas Maccabeus were more than just a series of military engagements. They were the initial crucial steps in a long and arduous journey toward liberation. They demonstrated the power of faith to inspire courage, the effectiveness of unconventional tactics against a larger, more powerful adversary, and the crucial role of charismatic leadership in galvanizing a resistance movement. The hammer of Judas had indeed fallen, and with each successful blow, it not only weakened the Seleucid grip on Judea, but also forged a sense of unity and hope among the Jewish people, planting the seeds for the eventual reclaiming of their religious freedom and the rededication of their sacred temple. The early victories of Judas Maccabeus, while significant in bolstering the morale of the Jewish people and disrupting Seleucid control in the countryside, had not yet addressed the heart of the matter, Jerusalem and the desecrated temple. For the devout Jews, the continued presence of pagan idolatry in their holiest place was an intolerable affront, a festering wound on their spiritual identity. Judas understood that true liberation could only be achieved by reclaiming Jerusalem and purifying the temple. Following their successes in the surrounding regions, Judas and his increasingly confident forces turned their attention towards the heavily fortified city. Jerusalem was not only a strategic stronghold, but also a symbol of Jewish sovereignty and the epicenter of their religious life. Retaking it from the Seleucid garrison would be a formidable challenge. The Seleucid forces, now acutely aware of the Maccabean threat, had strengthened their defenses in Jerusalem, particularly around the Acra, a fortified citadel overlooking the Temple Mount. This served as their main base of operations within the city, allowing them to exert control and suppress any signs of unrest. Judas, demonstrating his characteristic boldness, did not hesitate. He led his forces in a series of daring assaults on Seleucid positions around Jerusalem. The fighting was fierce and often hand-to-hand, as the rebels, fueled by religious fervor, pressed their attacks against the better-equipped Seleucid soldiers. The narrow streets and alleyways of the city became battlegrounds, echoing with the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded. One of Judas's key objectives was to gain control of the Temple Mount itself. The sight of the pagan altar and the ongoing sacrifices to Zeus Olympius was a constant source of anguish for the faithful. Accounts suggest that Judas and his men launched a determined assault on the temple precinct, facing stiff resistance from the Seleucid garrison stationed there. The battle for the temple was likely a protracted and bloody affair. The sanctity of the place would have undoubtedly inspired the Maccabean fighters to extraordinary acts of courage, while the Seleucid soldiers would have fought fiercely to maintain their control of this strategic and symbolic location. Historical accounts in 1 Maccabees describe how Judas, after securing parts of the city, turned his attention to the temple. He found the sanctuary desolate, the altar profaned, and the buildings neglected and in disrepair. The once vibrant center of Jewish worship had been turned into a pagan shrine, a stark testament to the oppression they had endured. The immediate priority for Judas and his followers was the purification of the temple. This was not merely a matter of cleaning the physical space, but a profound act of religious restoration. The pagan altar was torn down, and a new altar, consecrated according to Jewish law, was built in its place. The sacred vessels and implements that had been defiled were either cleansed or replaced. The culmination of these efforts was the rededication of the temple, a momentous occasion that is commemorated annually by the festival of Hanukkah. According to tradition, when the time came to light the menorah, the sacred candelabrum, only a single flask of ritually pure oil could be found. Miraculously, this small amount of oil burned for 8 days, long enough to prepare more pure oil for the temple. Whether a literal miracle or a symbolic representation of their enduring faith against all odds, the story of the oil became central to the Hanukkah celebration, signifying the triumph of light over darkness, of faith over oppression. The rededication of the temple in 164 BCE was a pivotal moment in the Maccabean revolt. It marked the first significant step towards reclaiming Jewish religious autonomy and a powerful symbol of their resilience and determination. However, the struggle was far from over. While the temple was purified and rededicated, the Seleucid Empire still held significant power in the region, and the Acra fortress in Jerusalem remained under their control, posing a continued threat. Furthermore, the Seleucid Empire, though weakened by internal conflicts and external pressures, was still capable of mounting significant military responses. Judas and his forces would face further battles and challenges in their fight to secure lasting peace and independence for Judea. Nevertheless, the retaking of Jerusalem and the purification of the temple were monumental achievements. They represented a tangible victory for the Maccabean cause, a testament to the courage and faith of Judas and his followers. The gates of Zion had been reclaimed, and the sacred flame of Jewish worship had been rekindled in its rightful place. The echoes of their struggle and their triumph would resonate through the centuries, inspiring future generations to stand firm in their beliefs against the forces of oppression. The purification of the temple in Jerusalem, a beacon of hope rekindled in the heart of Judea, marked a significant turning point in the Maccabean revolt. However, Judas Maccabeus, a leader with a vision that extended beyond the immediate triumph, recognized that the embers of oppression still glowed fiercely in the surrounding regions. True and lasting freedom for the Jewish people demanded a broader liberation, a sweeping away of Seleucid influence, and the securing of safety for Jewish communities scattered throughout Judea and the neighboring lands. Following the joyous rededication ceremonies in Jerusalem, Judas turned his attention to the outlying territories. Galilee to the north and Gilead to the east had witnessed significant Hellenization and persecution, with many Jews facing pressure to abandon their traditions and even suffering violence at the hands of Seleucid forces and their sympathizers. Driven by a sense of responsibility for his brethren and a strategic understanding that continued oppression in these areas posed a threat to the newly liberated Jerusalem, Judas embarked on a series of crucial campaigns. The expedition into Galilee was a mission of liberation and solidarity. Accompanied by his loyal band of fighters, Judas traversed the familiar hills and valleys, seeking out Jewish communities that had endured hardship under Seleucid rule. They engaged local Seleucid garrisons and those who actively enforced the Hellenistic decrees, often meeting with fierce resistance. Yet, the arrival of Judas and his Maccabees brought a surge of hope to the oppressed Jews. Many rallied to his banner, bolstering his forces and providing invaluable local knowledge. The victories achieved in Galilee were not just military triumphs. They were moments of profound spiritual and communal restoration, allowing Jews to once again practice their faith openly and with a renewed sense of security. The campaign into Gilead presented a different set of challenges. Jewish communities east of the Jordan River faced not only Seleucid oppression, but also attacks from hostile neighboring pagan tribes, likely encouraged and supported by the Seleucids as a means of further destabilizing the region and suppressing Jewish influence. Judas and his men crossed the Jordan, venturing into unfamiliar territory to defend their co-religionists. The battles in Gilead were often brutal and fought against determined adversaries. The Maccabees, though far from their home territory, fought with unwavering courage, driven by the imperative to rescue their fellow Jews from imminent danger. The successful extraction of many Jewish families from Gilead and their resettlement in the safer regions of Judea was a testament to Judas's commitment to the entire Jewish people, not just those within the immediate vicinity of Jerusalem. These campaigns in Galilee and Gilead had a profound impact on the wider landscape of the revolt. They demonstrated that the Maccabean movement was not a localized uprising destined to be easily contained. Instead, it was a force with the will and the capacity to project its power and influence across a wider geographical area. The victories served as a beacon of hope for Jews living under oppression elsewhere, inspiring further acts of resistance and further eroding Seleucid authority. Moreover, these campaigns provided Judas with invaluable experience in managing larger military forces over extended distances and in dealing with diverse terrains and adversaries, honing his skills as a military leader for the larger confrontations that lay ahead. However, the Seleucid Empire, despite internal strife and the death of Antiochus IV, remained a formidable power. The ascension of Antiochus v. Eupator did not signal a weakening of their resolve to reassert control over Judea. Lysias, a highly capable Seleucid general, was entrusted with the task of crushing the Maccabean rebellion once and for all. A large and well-equipped Seleucid army was dispatched to Judea, marching south with the clear objective of besieging Jerusalem and eliminating the Maccabean threat at its source. The subsequent siege of Beth Zur, a heavily fortified Judean city strategically located south of Jerusalem, marked a major turning point in this phase of the conflict. A significant Maccabean garrison held the city, determined to resist the Seleucid advance. Lysias, with his superior forces and siege weaponry, laid siege to Beth Zur, hoping to break the will of the rebels and open a path to Jerusalem. Judas, upon learning of the siege, faced a critical decision. To abandon Beth Zur would be to concede a strategically important location and demoralize his followers. To confront Lysias's larger army in open battle would be a risky gamble. Choosing the path of defiance, Judas rallied his forces and marched south to relieve the besieged city. The ensuing battle outside the walls of Beth Zur was a fierce and protracted engagement. The Maccabean forces, though outnumbered, launched wave after wave of determined attacks against the Seleucid lines, seeking to break their encirclement of the city. The Seleucid soldiers, well-trained and heavily armored, stood their ground, repelling the Maccabean assaults with disciplined ranks. Despite their courage and unwavering faith, the Maccabees could not overcome the numerical and material superiority of the Seleucid army. Ultimately, Judas was forced to withdraw his forces, unable to break the siege. Facing dwindling supplies and the relentless pressure of the Seleucid forces, the garrison of Beth Zur eventually negotiated an honorable surrender. The setback at Beth Zur served as a stark reminder of the continued power of the Seleucid Empire and the immense challenges that the Maccabees still faced. It underscored the fact that their early victories, while significant, had not yet secured their lasting freedom. However, even in this defeat, Judas demonstrated his strategic acumen by managing to withdraw his forces in relatively good order, avoiding a complete annihilation that would have severely crippled the rebellion. The courageous resistance of the defenders of Beth Zur also served as an inspiration, demonstrating the unwavering commitment of the Jewish people to their cause. Despite the failure to relieve Beth Zur, Judas did not lose heart. He continued to consolidate his control in the liberated areas, strengthening defenses and organizing his forces for future engagements. He understood that the path to freedom would be long and arduous, marked by both victories and setbacks. His campaigns beyond the walls of Jerusalem, though meeting with mixed results, were crucial in expanding the reach of the rebellion, offering hope to oppressed Jews, and laying the groundwork for the eventual achievement of Judean autonomy. The struggle for liberation was far from over. But under the steadfast leadership of Judas Maccabeus, the flame of resistance continued to burn brightly. The initial fervor of Antiochus V's campaign against the Maccabees was unexpectedly curtailed by events unfolding within the Seleucid Empire itself. Internal power struggles and the machinations of ambitious rivals created a volatile political landscape, forcing Lysias to withdraw his forces from Judea sooner than anticipated to address pressing matters back in Antioch. This unexpected respite provided Judas and the Maccabees with a crucial window of opportunity to consolidate their gains and prepare for future confrontations. The departure of the main Seleucid army did not, however, usher in an era of complete peace. While the immediate threat of a large-scale invasion receded, the Acra fortress in Jerusalem remained a heavily fortified Seleucid stronghold, its garrison a constant source of harassment and a symbol of continued foreign occupation. Judas recognized the strategic imperative of neutralizing this threat. The Acra's elevated position allowed its defenders to monitor and interfere with activities in the city, and it provided a potential base for future Seleucid incursions. Judas laid siege to the Acra, hoping to dislodge the remaining Seleucid forces. However, the fortress was well supplied and strongly defended, and the siege proved to be a protracted and difficult affair. The Maccabees, skilled in open battle and guerrilla tactics, lacked the experience and heavy equipment necessary to effectively breach the Acra's formidable defenses. The siege dragged on, consuming resources and manpower, with no immediate prospect of success. During this period of relative calm on a larger scale, internal tensions within Judean society also began to surface. While the majority of the population undoubtedly supported the Maccabean cause, disagreements arose regarding the best course of action and the extent to which compromise with Hellenistic influences might be acceptable in the future. Some, particularly those who had initially embraced certain aspects of Greek culture, may have felt alienated by the increasingly hardline stance of some within the Maccabean movement. These internal divisions, though not yet critical, represented a potential vulnerability that the Seleucids could exploit. The respite from major Seleucid offensives proved to be temporary. The shifting sands of power within the Seleucid Empire eventually led to the rise of a new king, Demetrius I Soter. Determined to reassert Seleucid authority throughout his domains, Demetrius recognized the need to deal decisively with the persistent rebellion in Judea. He dispatched a new and formidable army, led by the experienced general Bacchides, to quell the uprising and reinstate Seleucid control. The arrival of Bacchides and his army marked a new and dangerous phase of the conflict. Bacchides was a seasoned military commander known for his ruthlessness and his ability to conduct effective siege warfare. His army was likely larger and better equipped than the forces previously encountered by the Maccabees. Judas, aware of the renewed threat, prepared his forces for the inevitable confrontation. He understood that Bacchides represented a more serious challenge than previous Seleucid commanders. The strategic landscape had shifted once again, and the Maccabees would need all their courage and tactical ingenuity to withstand this new onslaught. The siege of the Acra continued, a drain on Maccabean resources as the larger Seleucid threat loomed on the horizon. Judas was faced with a difficult choice: continue the costly siege or redirect his forces to meet Bacchides in open battle. The decision would have profound implications for the future of the rebellion. The arrival of Bacchides also emboldened those within Judea who had remained loyal to the Seleucids or who had grown weary of the prolonged conflict. They likely saw his arrival as an opportunity to regain lost power and influence. This internal support could provide Bacchides with valuable intelligence and logistical assistance, further complicating the Maccabean strategic situation. As Bacchides and his army advanced into Judea, the stage was set for a renewed and potentially decisive clash. The relative lull that followed Lysias's withdrawal had allowed the Maccabees to breathe, but it had also allowed new threats to materialize. Judas Maccabeus, the hammer of the Jews, would once again be called upon to lead his people against a formidable enemy, with the fate of Judea hanging in the balance. The internal struggles within the Seleucid Empire had inadvertently provided a temporary reprieve, but the fundamental conflict for control of Judea was far from over, and the coming battles would test the resilience and the unity of the Maccabean movement as never before. The return of Bacchides and his formidable Seleucid legions cast a pall of dread over Judea, extinguishing the fragile hopes that had flickered after Lysias's hasty departure. This time, the intent was clear: to deliver a decisive blow to the Maccabean rebellion and reassert Seleucid dominion with an iron fist. Judas Maccabeus, his spirit undimmed by previous hardships, knew that a new and even more challenging chapter of the struggle had begun. The inevitable clash came at Edessa, a location whose precise identity remains debated, but whose significance as the site of a major Maccabean defeat is undeniable. Bacchides, a general seasoned in the brutal realities of imperial warfare, arrayed his forces, a formidable combination of well-trained infantry, heavily armed cavalry, and auxiliary troops, against the considerably smaller army led by Judas. The Maccabees, though fewer in number, were no less resolute, their hearts steeled by years of resistance and fueled by an unyielding faith in their cause. The Battle of Edessa was a brutal and bloody affair, a testament to the courage of both sides. The Maccabees, employing their familiar tactics of swift attacks and unwavering aggression, initially held their own against the larger Seleucid force. However, Bacchides' strategic deployment of his troops and the sheer weight of their numbers gradually began to turn the tide. The Seleucid cavalry, effective on the more open terrain, inflicted significant casualties on the less mobile Jewish forces. Despite Judas's valiant efforts to rally his men and maintain their lines, the Maccabees were eventually forced to concede ground, their ranks thinning under the relentless Seleucid assault. The battle concluded with a hard-fought retreat, leaving behind a significant number of Maccabean dead and a palpable sense of loss within their ranks. The defeat at Edessa had profound consequences for the rebellion. It not only diminished their fighting strength, but also emboldened their enemies and sowed seeds of doubt among some of their supporters. Bacchides, seizing the opportunity, moved swiftly to consolidate Seleucid control. He strategically fortified key towns and strongholds, most notably reinforcing the Acra in Jerusalem, which remained a constant thorn in the side of the Jewish population. Garrisons of Seleucid soldiers were stationed throughout Judea, their presence serving as a constant reminder of imperial power and a deterrent against further uprisings. Bacchides also implemented a policy of actively pursuing and capturing prominent Maccabean leaders and sympathizers, many of whom were subjected to imprisonment and execution, further weakening the organizational structure of the rebellion. In this dark period, the Maccabees suffered another grievous blow with the heroic death of Eleazar Avaran, Judas's younger brother. During one of the ensuing battles against the Seleucid forces, Eleazar displayed an act of extraordinary bravery, bordering on self-sacrifice. Seeing a towering war elephant adorned with what he believed to be the royal insignia, Eleazar, in a moment of impulsive courage, charged directly towards the massive creature. Undeterred by its size and the likely danger, he managed to strike the elephant from below, mortally wounding it. However, in the process, the colossal beast collapsed upon him, crushing him beneath its weight. Eleazar's death, while a testament to his incredible bravery and his willingness to sacrifice himself for the cause, was a significant loss for the Maccabees. He was not only a skilled warrior but also a symbol of unwavering loyalty and fierce determination, and his absence was deeply felt by his brothers and their followers. Despite these devastating setbacks, the defeat at Edessa, the loss of key leaders, and the tightening grip of Seleucid control, Judas Maccabeus remained defiant. He refused to yield to despair and continued to lead the remaining pockets of resistance, resorting once again to the guerrilla tactics that had served them well in the early days of the revolt. Hiding in the rugged Judean hills, Judas and his dwindling band of loyal fighters launched sporadic raids against isolated Seleucid outposts, disrupting their supply lines and keeping the flame of rebellion flickering, albeit dimly. However, the relentless pressure from Maccabees' forces was beginning to take its toll. The constant threat of betrayal by those weary of the conflict or tempted by Seleucid rewards, the dwindling supplies, and the heavy losses had significantly weakened the Maccabean ranks. Many of Judas's former comrades had either fallen in battle or had been captured and executed. The situation was becoming increasingly precarious, and even Judas's legendary resolve must have been tested by the seemingly insurmountable odds. The final chapter of Judas Maccabeus' heroic life unfolded at the Battle of Edessa. Facing yet another Seleucid army under the command of Maccabees, a force far exceeding his own depleted numbers, Judas was presented with a critical choice. His remaining advisors, weary of the constant fighting and mindful of their dwindling strength, urged him to avoid a direct confrontation and to continue their strategy of guerrilla warfare, hoping to wear down the Seleucids through attrition. However, Judas, perhaps driven by a deep sense of weariness from the endless retreats and a burning desire to make a decisive stand for the freedom of his people, chose a different path. He resolved to meet the Seleucid army in open battle, believing that even in defeat, their courage would serve as an inspiration for future resistance. The Battle of Edessa was a desperate and courageous last stand. The Maccabees, though heavily outnumbered and facing a well-rested and well-equipped enemy, fought with the ferocity of lions defending their den. Judas himself, a towering figure of courage on the battlefield, led his men from the front, his hammer-like blows felling Seleucid soldiers and inspiring his followers to fight with unwavering valor. Yet, against the overwhelming tide of the Seleucid forces, their bravery could only hold out for so long. Slowly but surely, the Maccabean ranks began to break, the relentless pressure of the enemy proving too much to bear. In the thick of the fighting, surrounded by fallen comrades but still wielding his sword with undiminished fury, Judas Maccabeus, the hammer of the Jews, fell in battle, his lifeblood staining the soil he had fought so fiercely to liberate. The death of Judas Maccabeus in 160 BCE marked a devastating blow to the Maccabean revolt. The man who had inspired a nation to rise against oppression, the brilliant strategist who had defied a mighty empire, the fearless leader whose courage had become legendary, he was gone. His fall sent shockwaves through the remaining Maccabean forces, many of whom scattered in despair. To the casual observer, it might have seemed that the Seleucids had finally crushed the rebellion, that the dream of Judean autonomy had died with its most valiant champion. However, the legacy of Judas Maccabeus and the sacrifices made by him and his followers would endure. The spirit of resistance, the yearning for religious freedom and self-determination that he had so powerfully ignited, could not be extinguished by a single battle or the death of a single man. The seeds of independence had been sown in the blood-soaked soil of Judea, And though the immediate future looked dark, the fight for freedom would continue, carried on by his brothers and the unwavering faith of a people who had tasted the bitter fruit of oppression and yearned for the sweet taste of liberty. The price of freedom had been immense, exacted in battles lost and the ultimate sacrifice of their heroic leader. But the dream for a free Judea lived on, waiting for its next champion to rise. The death of Judas Maccabeus cast a long shadow over Judea, seemingly extinguishing the flame of rebellion that he had so fiercely kindled. The Seleucids, under Maccabees, tightened their grip on the region, and many who had supported the Maccabean cause faced persecution and retribution. Yet, the spirit of resistance, though battered and bruised, was not broken. The ideals for which Judas had fought and the sacrifices he and his followers had made had taken root in the hearts of the Jewish people, and the struggle for autonomy would continue, albeit in a different form and under new leadership. In the immediate aftermath of Judas's death, the Maccabean movement faced a period of disarray. However, the mantle of leadership eventually fell to his brothers, Jonathan and Simon Maccabeus, who proved to be astute political and military leaders in their own right. They learned from Judas's triumphs and setbacks, adapting their strategies to the changing circumstances. Jonathan, taking the reins, skillfully navigated the complex political landscape of the Seleucid Empire, which continued to be plagued by internal conflicts and power struggles. He managed to secure certain concessions from various Seleucid rulers, gradually regaining some of the autonomy that had been lost. Through a combination of diplomacy and strategic military actions, Jonathan slowly rebuilt the Maccabean forces and reasserted Jewish control over key territories. He even managed to secure the prestigious position of high priest, further solidifying Jewish authority within Judea. Simon, upon succeeding Jonathan, continued the work of consolidation and liberation. He was eventually successful in expelling the remaining Seleucid garrisons from Judea, including the long-contested Acre fortress in Jerusalem. His reign marked a significant step towards full independence. The Jewish people, weary of foreign rule, recognized Simon's leadership and declared him and his descendants hereditary rulers and high priests, effectively establishing the Hasmonean dynasty. The Hasmonean period that followed was a complex era in Jewish history, marked by both periods of expansion and prosperity, as well as internal strife and increasing Hellenistic influence among some segments of society. However, the foundation of this independent Jewish state was laid by the initial rebellion led by Mattathias and the heroic efforts of Judas Maccabeus. The story of the Maccabean revolt became a powerful narrative of resistance against tyranny and the unwavering defense of religious freedom. The annual celebration of Hanukkah, commemorating the rededication of the temple and the miraculous burning of the oil, served as a constant reminder of this pivotal moment in Jewish history. It became a symbol of hope and resilience, a testament to the enduring power of faith in the face of oppression. The legacy of Judas Maccabeus extended far beyond the immediate political and religious outcomes of the revolt. He became a symbol of courage, determination, and the willingness to fight for one's beliefs, even against overwhelming odds. His name, the Hammer, echoed through the generations, representing the strength and resolve of the Jewish people in the face of adversity. While the books of Maccabees were eventually excluded from the Hebrew Bible and the Protestant Old Testament, their historical significance and their powerful message of faith and resistance ensured their continued study and reverence within Jewish tradition and certain Christian denominations. They provide invaluable insight into a crucial period of Jewish history and continue to inspire reflection on the timeless themes of religious freedom, cultural identity, and the struggle against oppression. The story of the Maccabees serves as a reminder that faith can be a powerful catalyst for action, that even a small group of determined individuals can challenge a mighty empire, and that the pursuit of freedom often demands great sacrifice. The battles fought in the Judean hills, the courage displayed by Mattathias and his sons, and the strategic brilliance and unwavering leadership of Judas Maccabeus forged a legacy that would continue to shape Jewish identity and inspire movements for liberation for centuries to come. The fire of rebellion, once lit, may be temporarily suppressed, but the embers of hope and the yearning for freedom can endure, waiting for the right moment to reignite and illuminate the path towards a more just and autonomous future. The legacy of the Maccabees, forged in the fires of conflict and faith, remains a potent reminder of the enduring power of the human spirit to resist oppression and to fight for what is right. All videos on this channel are fictional works. All situations, characters, and events depicted in the videos are created by the creative team and do not reflect any real-life events, organizations, or individuals. The names of characters in the videos are created randomly. Any resemblance to the names of any real individuals or organizations is purely coincidental and unintentional. We are committed to ensuring that the content on this channel does not contain elements that incite, distort, or negatively impact any individual, organization, or group. If any content causes misunderstanding, we are willing to receive feedback and make appropriate adjustments. The images used in the videos are for illustrative purposes only.